"You're cheating on me with that vendor." He was fixing the station's satellite dish. "I just sent him a thank you message and afterwards we just chat occasionally." The rain pounded against the windows of Sweet Sensations restaurant, the heavy droplets creating a rhythmic symphony against the glass panes. Jennifer Emeka rushed inside, her designer umbrella, a birthday gift from her sister Ada, turning inside out in the fierce wind. Her carefully pressed burgundy blazer was dotted with raindrops, and her new suede pumps were already showing signs of water damage. She had just finished her first week as the new evening Love Insights show host at Radio Sunrise, and her throat was still raw from 3 straight hours of talking. The station manager had praised her performance, but Jennifer knew she needed to up her game and find her rhythm, and a unique voice that would set her apart from the countless other radio personalities in Lagos. All she wanted now was a hot cup of Mag's green tea, maybe some small chops, and enough quiet to process the whirlwind week she'd had. The restaurant's floor was slick with water tracked in by other rain refugees, and as Jennifer stepped forward, her already compromised suede pumps betrayed her. She felt herself pitching forward, her heart leaping into her throat. "Careful." A strong hand caught her elbow, the grip firm but gentle. The stabilizing force was accompanied by a rich, deep voice that seemed to resonate through her entire body. Jennifer looked up, water droplets still clinging to her lashes, and found herself staring into the most intense brown eyes she'd ever seen. They were the color of dark honey, flecked with gold, and filled with genuine concern. The man attached to those eyes was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders encased in a crisp blue suit that somehow hadn't caught a single raindrop. His clean-shaven face bore high cheekbones and a strong jaw, and when he smiled, a small dimple appeared in his cheek. He radiated the kind of confidence that came from old money and good breeding. "Thank you," she said, straightening herself, suddenly very aware of how disheveled she must look. "Michael Chuka," he smiled, helping her to a nearby table, his hand never leaving her elbow until she was safely seated. The touch lingered a moment longer than necessary, sending an unexpected shiver down her spine. "And you're Jennifer? I recognized your voice. I've been listening to your show this week." Jennifer felt her cheeks warm, and not just from embarrassment over her near fall. "You have?" "Every evening," he confirmed, sliding into the seat across from her without asking, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. His movements were graceful, controlled. "Your advice about the woman whose husband was cheating? Brilliant. The way you told her that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, that she needed to protect herself even while working on her marriage, that was exactly what she needed to hear." He leaned forward slightly, his cologne, something expensive and subtle, reaching across the table. "Let me buy you a coffee? Or tea, if you prefer. You sound like you could use something warm." One coffee turned into 2, then into dinner at an intimate Italian restaurant around the corner. Michael insisted on ordering in fluent Italian, explaining that he'd studied in Milan for 2 years. He asked questions about her show, her family, her dreams, and actually listened to the answers, adding thoughtful comments that showed he was truly engaged in the conversation. Dinner turned into regular dates, art galleries where Michael demonstrated his knowledge of contemporary Nigerian artists, jazz clubs where he knew all the musicians by name, quiet evenings at upscale restaurants where the staff greeted him like an old friend. Michael was everything Jennifer had advised her listeners to look for: successful as a senior investment banker, charming in any social situation, attentive to her every need and mood. Perhaps too attentive, but Jennifer ignored that whisper of doubt. She ignored the way his eyes followed her movements when she spoke to male waiters, the slight tightening of his grip on her waist when other men looked her way. After all, wasn't it flattering that he cared so much? As weeks turned into months, Jennifer settled into a routine of tiptoeing around Michael's jealousy while building her career at Radio Sunrise. Each successful broadcast strengthened her confidence, even as his possessiveness grew more pronounced. But she convinced herself that's what love looked like: intense, all-consuming, even suffocating at times. It was easier to focus on the good moments, the expensive gifts, the passionate declarations of love, the way he made her feel like the center of his universe. Until the day everything changed. One Friday, as the evening light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Michael's luxury apartment, casting long shadows across the imported marble floors, Jennifer's heels clicked against the stone as she entered, the sound echoing in the vast space. She was humming softly, still riding the high of a successful broadcast and the confidence that came with her new braided hairstyle. "You changed your hair." Michael's voice cut through her happy mood like a knife through butter. He stood in the kitchen doorway, still in his work clothes but with his tie loosened and jacket discarded. His face was unreadable, his knuckles were white around the glass of whiskey he held. "Yes. Do you like it?" Jennifer touched her new braids self-consciously, the intricate pattern her hairdresser had spent hours creating. Each braid was a work of art, woven with subtle attachment that caught the light. She'd spent a small fortune at Marie's hair palace, but the boost to her confidence had been worth every naira. "Why didn't you tell me you were going to change it?" Michael's voice was unnaturally calm, like the air before a storm. "I didn't think I needed to." Jennifer's smile faltered, her hand dropping from her hair. The confidence she'd felt all day began to evaporate like morning dew under a harsh sun. It was a spontaneous decision after work. Michael crossed the room in 3 long strides, his expensive Oxford shoes echoing against the floor like thunderclaps. The setting sun cast half his face in shadow, transforming his handsome features into something almost grotesque. "I liked your hair before. Change it back." "Michael, that's ridiculous." "It's my hair." The words died in her throat as his fist connected with the wall beside her head, the impact sending vibrations through her body. A framed photo of them at the Lagos Boat Club crashed to the floor, glass splintering across the imported tiles. The sound seemed to snap something in Michael. His face softened instantly, like a mask sliding back into place. He pulled her into a hug, his expensive cologne, Clive Christian No. 1, $1,000 a bottle, surrounding her like a sweet poison. His heart hammered against her cheek, his hands trembling slightly as they stroked her back. "I'm sorry, baby. I just love you so much. I want to be part of every decision in your life." He kissed her forehead, his lips warm and gentle now. "You understand, right? We're a team. Teams make decisions together." Jennifer nodded against his chest, ignoring the voice in her head that sounded suspiciously like her own radio advice. "Control is not love. Love lifts you up, it doesn't cage you in." How many times had she told her listeners those exact words? But this was different. Michael was different. He just loved deeply, passionately. Wasn't that what she'd always wanted? That evening, Michael took her to Lagos' most exclusive restaurant, Terra Culture. Over a 7-course tasting menu paired with vintage wines, he was the perfect gentleman she'd first fallen for, charming, attentive, and full of remorse. He held her hand across the table, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm as he promised to do better. The way the candlelight softened his features made it easy to believe him, to see only the man she loved and not the one who'd left her shaking just hours before. For a few peaceful days, everything seemed normal. Jennifer almost convinced herself she'd imagined the darker moments of their relationship. Some months later, at the Radio Sunrise studio, the soundproofed walls created a cocoon of peace, the soft red on-air light casting a warm glow over the room. Jennifer leaned into the professional microphone, her voice smooth as honey as she counseled her latest caller. "And that's why you need to trust your instincts. If something feels wrong in your relationship," she said. Then suddenly, the studio's door burst open with such force that the sound dampeners shuddered. Michael stood in the doorway, his normally impeccable appearance in disarray. His blue Armani tie was askew, sweat beaded on his forehead, and his eyes, those eyes that had once seemed so warm, burned with an almost feverish intensity. In his shaking hand, he held his latest iPhone 14. "Who's James?" he demanded, his voice booming through the studio despite the sound dampening. Jennifer's professional instincts took over. She quickly faded up Wizkid's latest hit, Peace of Mind, removing her headphones with trembling hands. "Michael, you can't come in here during broadcast. Answer the question." He stalked toward her desk, the soft red on-air light casting a warm glow on his face. "Who is James and why is he commenting on and liking all your pictures on Instagram?" "He's my cousin. You've met him at family gatherings." Jennifer kept her voice low, painfully aware of her colleagues watching through the glass walls. Young interns had stopped their coffee runs to stare, and her producer, Mrs. Ifeoma, was already calling the security. "Don't lie to me." Michael grabbed her phone from the desk, his manicured fingers swiping through her Instagram messages with brutal efficiency. The screen illuminated his face from below, making him look almost demonic. The station's security arrived quickly, Solomon, the head guard, with his gentle eyes and warrior's build, accompanied by 2 younger guards. They moved with practiced efficiency, like they'd been expecting this day to come. "Mr. Michael," Solomon's deep voice carried authority without aggression. "You need to leave now, sir. This is a restricted area." Michael's transformation was immediate and chilling. The rage vanished behind a smile, though his eyes remained cold. Of course. Just a misunderstanding with my girlfriend. You know how it is." He straightened his blue tie, smoothed his hair, and allowed himself to be escorted out, every inch the successful businessman again. But at the door, he turned back. "We'll talk about this later, baby." The threat in those soft words made Jennifer's spine turn to ice. Her hands shook as she put her headphones back on, but her few years of broadcasting experience kicked in. Her voice remained steady as she continued giving advice about healthy relationships to her listeners, even as her own relationship crumbled around her. Later that night, 3 dozen roses arrived at her apartment, blood-red blooms from the most expensive florist in Victoria Island. The card read, "I'm sorry. I'm just crazy about you. You know I only act this way because I love you so much. Please forgive me. Yours truly, Michael." The roses were accompanied by a small blue Tiffany box containing a diamond bracelet that must have cost more than 2 months of her salary. She did what she had been doing for months now, she forgave him. The roses went into her finest vase, the bracelet joined others in her jewelry box, and the incident joined a growing collection of memories she tried not to think about. 3 months later, in one of the finest restaurants in Lagos, the aroma of fresh jollof rice wafted through the air, mixing with the sounds of clinking cutlery and soft Afrobeats playing overhead. Ada, Jennifer's younger sister, sat across from her at their favorite corner table, the one near the window that offered a view of the bustling Ikoyi street life. Late afternoon sunlight filtered through the glass. Ada hadn't touched her food, her perfectly manicured fingers instead pushing the orange-red rice around her plate. The gold bangles on her wrist, a matching set she shared with Jennifer, gifts from their mother, clinked softly with each movement. Her expression was troubled, dark eyes frequently darting to her sister's long-sleeved blouse despite the Lagos heat. "I don't like the way Michael looks at you," Ada finally said, setting down her fork with a quiet determination. A waiter passed by with a sizzling plate of suya, but even the tempting aroma couldn't break the tension that had settled over their table. "What do you mean?" Jennifer took a sip of her Chapman, the sweet mocktail doing little to ease the knot in her stomach. She knew exactly what Ada meant. "Like you're his property. Like you're a beautiful painting he's bought and doesn't want anyone else to even glance at." Ada leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "And those bruises on your arm last month? I told you, I bumped into the door, Jennifer interrupted, tugging self-consciously at her sleeve. The air conditioning vent above them suddenly felt too cold, raising goosebumps on her skin. Doors don't leave finger-shaped bruises, sister. Ada reached across the table, her hand warm and familiar on Jennifer's. Her gold nail polish caught the light, the same shade she'd worn since they were teenagers practicing manicures on each other. You spend all day telling women to leave abusive relationships. You've helped so many of them find their strength. Why can't you see what's happening in your own? The restaurant's ambient noise seemed to fade away, leaving only the sound of Jennifer's heartbeat in her ears. A young couple at the next table laughed at some private joke, the sound jarring against the sisters' serious conversation. Michael loves me, Jennifer insisted, but the words felt hollow, rehearsed. She withdrew her hand from Ada's, using it instead to smooth her already perfect hair, a nervous habit from childhood. He just gets jealous sometimes. He's working on it. Love shouldn't hurt, Ada quoted Jennifer's own radio catchphrase back to her, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. How many times have you said those exact words to your listeners? How many women have you helped escape situations just like this? It's complicated, Jennifer sighed, watching a yellow taxi navigate the busy street outside the restaurant. Besides, he's been much better lately. He's seeing a therapist. The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, but she had repeated it so many times, to Ada, to herself, that it almost felt like the truth. The reality was that Michael had thrown the therapist's business card in her face, saying he didn't need some stranger telling him how to love his woman. Ada opened her mouth to argue further, but Jennifer's phone buzzed on the table. Michael's name flashed on the screen, accompanied by a photo of him smiling, the gentle smile she'd fallen in love with, not the cold one she'd grown to fear. Where are you? Who are you with? Jennifer's fingers flew across the keyboard, lunch with Ada. I told you this morning. The reply was immediate, you've been gone 2 hours. Come home now. Ada watched her sister's face change, noted how her shoulders tensed, how her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for her purse. You're leaving, aren't you? Because he called? He's had a rough day at work, Jennifer explained, already standing. She dropped several naira notes on the table, enough to cover both their barely touched meals. The merger he's been working on. There's always an excuse, Ada cut in, her voice tight with frustration and fear. Today it's work stress, yesterday it was traffic, before that it was his childhood trauma. When will you realize that his excuses don't justify his actions? Jennifer paused in the act of gathering her things, really looking at her sister for the first time during their lunch. Ada had lost weight, dark circles under her eyes suggesting sleepless nights. How many hours had she spent worrying about her older sister? How many prayers had she whispered for Jennifer's safety? For a moment, standing there in the warm restaurant with the smell of spices in the air and her sister's love surrounding her, Jennifer felt the truth trying to break through her carefully constructed defenses. But then her phone buzzed again. He loves me, Jennifer repeated, but she couldn't meet Ada's eyes as she said it. He just needs time to work through his issues. People can change, right? Ada watched helplessly as her sister hurried out of the restaurant, her heels clicking against the tile floor like a countdown. Through the window, she saw Jennifer slide into her Toyota Corolla 2023 model, a recent gift from Michael that Ada suspected was really another way to track her sister's movements. As the car pulled away, Ada whispered to herself, people can change, sister. But abusers rarely do. One Saturday afternoon, in Michael's well-furnished living room, a crystal whiskey glass sailed past Jennifer's head, missing her by inches before shattering against the imported wallpaper. The sound was like ice breaking, sharp and final. Droplets of aged Macallan stained the white wall like tears. You're cheating on me with that vendor. Michael's voice bounced off the high ceilings, his expensive loafers leaving indents in the plush tiles as he paced. the setting sun casting his shadow long and distorted across the room. Jennifer pressed herself against the cool wall, her heart hammering so hard she feared it might break through her chest. Her designer blazer, a gift from Michael, like so many things she owned now, felt too tight, constricting. He was fixing the station's satellite dish. I just sent him a thank you message and afterwards we just chat occasionally. The words came out shakier than she intended. The technician had been nice, kind-faced, reminding her of her late brother. I saw how he looks at you. Michael stalked closer, close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath mixing with his expensive cologne. His tie was loosened, top button undone, the disheveled look that once made her heart flutter now made it freeze. And you enjoyed it, didn't you? The attention? Just like you enjoy all those male collars on your show, hanging on your every word. Michael, please, she tried to edge toward the door, but his apartment suddenly seemed vast and foreign, the modern furniture casting strange shadows in the afternoon light. In the distance, Lego's traffic created a constant backdrop of horns and engines, oblivious to the drama unfolding some distance away. Show me your phone. No. His hand extended, catching the last rays of sunlight. No. The word was barely a whisper, but it felt like shouting in the charged atmosphere. Her voice shook but held firm, a small act of defiance that cost her more courage than she knew she possessed. His hands shot out, gripping her arms with bruising force. The expensive watch she'd given him for his birthday dug into her skin. What are you hiding? Nothing. You're hurting me. The words echoed off the marble floors, bouncing back like accusations. The pain in her voice seemed to cut through his rage like a knife through butter. He released her suddenly, stumbling backward as if burned. His face crumpled, the transformation as dramatic as it was familiar. Gone was the threatening figure, replaced by the man she'd fallen in love with, vulnerable, regretful, lost. Baby, I'm so sorry. He sank to his knees, tears welled in his eyes, and his hands, the same hands that had gripped her moments ago, shook as he reached for her. I don't know what came over me. Please, please forgive me. I'll get help, I promise. Real help this time. Jennifer looked down at the red marks on her arms that were already darkening to bruises. They would join others, a map of pain she'd become expert at hiding under long sleeves despite Lego's heat. She should leave. Every fiber of her being, every piece of advice she'd ever given on her radio show, every lesson from her mother screamed at her to walk out that door and never look back. Instead, she heard herself say, okay. But this is the last time, Michael. I mean it. The words tasted like ash in her mouth, identical to ones she'd spoken before. His face lit up with hope and relief. He pressed his lips on her forehead, his tears dampening her face. I love you so much. Too much, maybe. I'll prove it to you. I'll be better. You'll see. And for a week, he was better. He spent the next 7 days proving his love in ways that made her colleagues sigh with envy. Surprise lunch deliveries arrived at the station, her favorite jollof rice from Yellow Chili, fresh smoothies from the expensive juice bar in Victoria Island. Her phone buzzed constantly with sweet messages and heart emojis. A new Cartier watch appeared on her desk, its diamonds catching the studio lights. Her co-workers cooed over the gifts, calling her lucky to have found such a romantic man. Only Solomon, the security guard who had helped clean up the broken glass that night, looked worried. He'd seen her tears in the parking lot too many times, heard her muffled phone conversations pleading with Michael to calm down. Not all that glitters is gold, Madam Jennifer, he said one evening as she left the station, her arms laden with yet another bouquet of roses. The Nigerian proverb carried the weight of generations of wisdom. He's changing, she insisted, arranging her face into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. People can change, right? Solomon just shook his head, his dark eyes holding secrets of other women he'd watched walk similar paths. Some people change, madam. But a leopard rarely changes its spots. Be careful. As her car disappeared into the Lagos twilight, Solomon whispered a prayer to whatever gods might be listening. He'd seen too many women believe in change that never came, watched too many stories end in tears, or worse. If you enjoyed this story and would like to see the part 2, please write continue or drop a heart emoji in the comments section below. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe and turn on post notification. Thanks for watching.